Let's escape our reality for a while, over old hills and far away as we dive into Middle-earth, a fantastical world where mankind existed alongside elves, dwarves, and fire-breathing dragons. In 1937, the world was graced with J.R.R. Tolkien's genius in his book The Hobbit. This was followed by The Lord of the Rings in 1954, both of which were pioneers of the literature game. In this marvelous video, we're going to explore the stories of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings created in the quaint 2D world of animation. The author Tolkien beautifully wove narratives of epic stories on good versus evil. We've seen arcs of redemption, triumph, betrayal, and pain. Decades later, the Rankin Bass Studios and Ralph Bakshi adapted these novels into animations. We begin with 1978's The Hobbit, which was a cozier and friendlier iteration of its sequels. The Lord of the Rings, created by Bakshi, could be described as a fantastical fever dream at best. In 2001, Peter Jackson, inspired by the animated versions and mostly the books, kick-started his incredible trilogy. All these years later, we have two trilogies of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but this isn't an ode to Jackson's work. Tolkien's creations have a special place in most of the world's hearts. There's a comfort and collective nostalgia attached to these stories. The storytelling of Rankin Bass and Bakshi only added to this. Let's take a minute to admire that, shall we? Spoiler for the upcoming movie ahead. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Go now and speed well.
The Hobbit, 1977. This film hit the big screens in 1977, directed by Jules Bass and Arthur Rankin Jr. This was the very first iteration of The Hobbit. Did you know that this movie was animated by the Japanese studio Topcraft? The bankruptcy of this studio led to the creation of everyone's beloved Studio Ghibli. We can spot the differences of this throughout this film. The story begins with Bilbo Baggins, who lives in a hole in the ground. Not a nasty, smelly hole filled with the ends of worms, but a hobbit hole. In his peaceful corner of the world, Bilbo, voiced by Orson Bean, sat outside his home when he was approached by Gandalf, one of the wandering wizards. Gandalf the Grey, voiced by John Huston, was looking for a burglar and believed that Bilbo would be fit for the role. Bilbo was part Took, a line of hobbits infamous for being particularly adventurous. But he was also part Baggins, who relished their peace and quiet. That evening, a knock sounded on his door. 13 dwarves were suddenly at his service. These were Dwalin, Balin, Fili, Kili, Dori, Nori, Ori, Owen, Glowin, Bifur, Bofer, and Bombur, along with the leader of their party, Thorin Oakenshield. But what on Middle-earth were they doing there? They wished to reclaim their home. For you see, far off in the east, beyond the misty mountains and dark forests of Mirkwood, lay the Lonely Mountain. The kingdom under the mountain, Erebor, was ruled by Thorin's grandfather, Thrain. The prosperous dwarves strung necklaces of the rarest gems and carved harps of gold. Their vast mounds of wealth attracted a fire drake from the north. Smaug smelled the dwarven treasure, invaded the mountain, and destroyed Dale, the city of men. After rebuilding their lives, the dwarves were set on revenge. On the first leg of their journey, the dwarves, along with Bilbo, stumbled across 3 mountain trolls named Tom, Bert, and William. But the burglar didn't burgle as expected, and Bilbo, along with the rest, were caught. The trolls took their own sweet time debating how to skin and cook the company for their supper, oblivious to the fact that dawn approached them. Gandalf returned just as the party was being tied to spits. The sun rose, and the trolls agonizingly turned to stone. Exploring their even stinkier lair, Gandalf came across his elven-made blade, Glamdring, and Bilbo found a shorter sword that glowed blue whenever orcs or goblins were near. Gandalf finally bestowed the map and key to Erebor unto Thorin. They reached Rivendell, the city of elves, where Elrond read them the moon letters that made up Erebor's map. The instructions said they must stand by the gray stone, which the thrush would knock on. Back on their path, the party was caught in a storm, which sent them running into a cave. They fell into a whole goblin kingdom underneath. The Goblin King tried to devour Thorin for wielding an elvish sword named Goblin Cleaver. Once again, Gandalf came to their rescue, but during this tussle for escape, Bilbo tumbled down a ditch and found himself in a dark cave. He heard the raspy voice of Gollum, a strange creature who used to be a hobbit ages ago. Bilbo found a golden ring on the ground, and he pocketed it just as he met Gollum. The slimy humanoid challenged him to a game of riddles. In truth, the nasty little cave creature planned to use the ring and catch Bilbo off guard in order to eat him, but soon realized that his precious was missing. The Hobbit puts the ring on, rendering himself invisible, and finds a way out of the cave. It was only pity that stayed his sword from killing a defenseless Gollum. The Hobbit reunited with the dwarves and wizard, but were run over by goblin warg riders, who chased them up towering pine trees. The monsters set the trees on fire, which lapped at their feet. The Lord of the Eagles, Thorondor, soared in just in time and picked up Gandalf and the rest. The company was dropped in one piece by the edge of Mirkwood. Danger never ceased to meet the party head-on, as they were driven nearly mad in the enchanted forest before being attacked by giant spiders. Bilbo made his first kill with his sword, and the spider screamed about how it stings, which is why he ended up naming his sword Sting. After evading the arachnids, Thorin and his company ran into the Wood Elves. Their king, Thranduil, kept them imprisoned. By this point, Bilbo had become quite familiar with the ways of a burglar, especially aided by a magical ring that granted him the powers of invisibility. He rescued the captured dwarves by hiding them in empty barrels, sending them rolling across the river out of the Elven Kingdom and into Lake Town. The party of dwarves and their burglar met Bard the Bowman, who welcomed Thorin into his home, fed the ravenous dwarves, and sent them on their way armed with the finest weapons made by man. After such a tiresome journey, they finally stood before the Lonely Mountain, their home that had been mercilessly snatched. The thrush knocked right on time as Bilbo found the secret passage. Inside, the Hobbit quickly put on the ring to steal back the dwarven gold and heirlooms. There, he set his eyes upon the great dragon who lay slumbering on his costly bed. Even his underbelly was crusted with gems and jewels. But Bilbo noticed a loose scale right below the dragon's neck. Smaug awoke and claimed to smell the thief, even as the Hobbit remained unseen. The dragon was voiced by Richard Boone, and even though his American accent seemed slightly out of place, he delivered his lines with the effect that we'd expect from Smaug. The two engaged in a game of riddles, with Bilbo referring to Smaug as the greatest of all calamities, stoking the worm's already inflated ego. The dragon was convinced that the Hobbit was a barrel rider from Lake Town. Even Smaug the Terrible failed to kill the best of the dwarves' burglar, who took his ring off and fled away with one golden chalice. Bilbo sent the knock-on-the-stone thrush to Lake Town. Bard warned the people of impending dragonfire while he unearthed a deadly black arrow crafted by the dwarves of old. The final showdown between Bard and Smaug showed the brave bowman finding the chink in the dragon's armor and driving the black arrow into its target. After Smaug fell, Bard was anointed king and savior of his people. He led a small army of men to the entrance of Erebor, claiming that the great serpent was dead, and requested the dwarven king's kindness in helping them rebuild Lake Town. But Thorin had already fallen ill to the sickness of greed over his reclaimed treasure, and would rather go to war than share his wealth. Just then, Thranduil and his army arrived to claim the elven heirlooms lost under mounds of dwarven gold. This conflict almost began a three-way war between the men, dwarves, and elves. Gandalf galloped back into the mess and shouted of their common enemy, an army of goblins that marched to Erebor at that very moment. The men, dwarves, and elves joined forces and fought the goblins, who were then attacked by the great eagles, led by their lord Thorondor. The battle of the five armies raged on until all that is good in the hearts of men, dwarves, and elves alike conquered evil, but at a cost. Thorin had shaken off his greed and fought bravely unto death. This animated saga was mocked at first, but now has become a cult classic amongst Tolkien fans. However, the question remains, does the fanbase prefer this light-hearted film made for children more than Jackson's grand trilogy of The Hobbit? Lord of the Rings, 1978. In 1978, Ralph Bakshi decided to adapt the Lord of the Rings books to animation. He merged Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers into one movie, which was originally titled The Lord of the Rings Part 1. This was the first ever movie painting made mainly through rotoscoping. This involved the animator tracing over motion picture footage. So Bakshi managed to trace really complex live-action footage into animation. The early years of the Second Age began with the forging of the Great Ring. rings, 3 for the elves, 7 for the dwarven lords, and 9 for the bravest of men. In the fiery pits of Mount Doom, the Dark Lord Sauron forged one more ring of power, the One Ring to rule them all. He poured his insidious will to dominate the free lands of Middle-earth into this ring. The last alliance of men and elves rallied against Sauron's tyranny but fell to his powers. The hearts of men were easily corrupted, and Sauron's spirit fed on this. Case in point, the Prince of Gondor, Isildur, failed to destroy the ring when he was meant to. The ring betrayed Isildur to his death, and after years of fading into mere myth, came to Gollum. We already know how Bilbo Baggins came into possession of the One Ring. Ages later, Bilbo celebrated his 11th or 111th birthday. He made a dramatic speech, messing with his guest by pulling a party trick of vanishing into thin air. But Gandalf knew what was really going on. He urged Bilbo to leave the ring behind, which he did after much trouble. Like in the book, 17 whole years passed when Gandalf finally realized the ring wished nothing more than to go back to its master. Frodo Baggins held the ring and was ordered to bring it to Rivendell, accompanied by his sweet gardener, Samwise Gamgee. Meanwhile, Gandalf rushed to warn Saruman the Wise about Sauron's return, but it was too late. The White Wizard had already turned to the dark side. On their way to Rivendell, Frodo and Sam were joined by Meriadoc Brandybuck, or Merry and a Fool of a Took, aka Pippin. The Nazgul hunted the party of hobbits astride their rotten horses. Remember the iconic scene in Peter Jackson's trilogy when the hobbits hid under the roots of a big tree as a black rider leaned over the edge? That was taken directly from this 1978 film. The hobbits made it to Bree, where they met Strider, who offered to lead the way to Rivendell. Frodo was impaled by a Morgul blade atop Weathertop by the chief of the Nazgul. Rescued and rushed to Rivendell, Frodo was healed by Lord Elrond, who knew that the hobbit would always carry a physical and spiritual scar from the stabbing. Frodo reunited with Bilbo, now weak and slowly dying of old age. The hobbit let his lust for the ring take him over once again. The decision was made. The ring must be destroyed, and the fate of their world and its people relied on it. Frodo volunteered to take the ring into Mordor, accompanied by Aragorn, Legolas the Elf Prince, Boromir the Captain of Gondor, Gimli the Dwarf, Gandalf, and his 3 hobbit friends. But the elements turned against them through Saruman's dark sorcery. So the Fellowship of the Ring were forced to walk the path through the mines of Moria. Countless horrors awaited them in the darkness. The beastly Watcher in the Water, Morian goblins, and the ungodly flame of Udun, the Balrog. Although the Balrog was far from terrifying in this animation, it was more kind of cute. As the wielder of the Flame of Anor, Gandalf never let the Balrog pass and was pulled down into the abyss as the fools fled. Into Lothlorien, where they met the fairest of all elves, Galadriel. The remaining fellowship was bestowed with gifts, and just as Frodo was left with a warning, the ring fed off its worthy traits of being noble and kind. The ring had seized Boromir's mind, a man whose heart was easily seduced by whispered promises of glory and honor as they left Lorien. Meanwhile, Saruman had unleashed an army of Uruk-hai, a crossbreed between orcs and goblins. They were ordered to bring the halflings back alive and unspoiled. Boromir cornered Frodo in the forest and tried to take the ring for himself. The Fellowship was ambushed by the forces of Uruk-hai. Frodo used the ring to flee, while Merry and Pippin distracted the beast. Boromir gets a chance to redeem himself as he sets down his own life to defend the defenseless. In his final moments as a warrior, the Captain of Gondor used his powers to protect Merry and Pippin, who couldn't protect themselves against the Uruk-hai. The trio of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli set off in search of the 2 hobbits. The ranger traced their tracks into Fangorn Forest. What madness led them in there? Ancient magic lingered in the deep-rooted trees. The trio dared to venture further in and stumbled across the White Wizard. Not the one with a mind of metal and wheels, not the one who didn't care for growing things, but one who was divinely transformed. Gandalf was reawakened. He went by Gandalf the White and was sent as the sole emissary of the Valar to Middle-earth for a purpose. He summoned the Lord of all Horses, Shadowfax, and the Four-Road to Edoras, the capital of Rohan. The time had come to rid King Theoden of his demons. Saruman had planted an agent, Grima Wormtongue, to do his dirty work, subduing the king and forcing him to do the corrupted wizard's bidding. After he was freed, the king and his people were accompanied by Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli to the fortress of Helm's Deep, while Gandalf rode over the horizon in search of the displaced riders of Rohan, led by Éomer. Merry and Pippin had escaped their kidnappers and ran mindlessly into the Fangorn Forest, where they met the ancient magic Ents. Treebeard lamented the state of the forest and how their guardian, Saruman, had let the greed for power blind him. Back to Frodo and Sam, still on their perilous journey to Mount Doom. They were being stalked by Gollum. The slimy creature couldn't rid his addiction of his precious. Frodo pitied him and refrained from killing the beast despite Sam's protests. In exchange, Gollum offered to be their guide into Mordor. The Battle of Helm's Deep began when Saruman sent his full might of Uruk-hai just as Sauron sent his orcs to break down the fortress. But then the dawn of a new day broke. Gandalf, accompanied by the riders of Rohan, stood by the horizon and charged into the Sea of Orcs. Hope was restored. The land was stained with the blood of Rohan and Isengard alike, but men persevered and emerged victorious. Saruman was taken care of, but what about the ring? Frodo's kindness brought out Smeagol, the hobbit that existed ages before. This made Gollum question his own ruinous behavior and obsession with the ring. He felt conflicted between actually helping the hobbits and trying to take the ring for himself. In the end, he claimed that she might be able to help them, leading them presumably into Shelob's cave. And that was the abrupt end of the movie. The way it was received, critics coined it a flawed but inspired interpretation. Bakshi really took a daring gamble with the style of animation, but it landed fairly well. Characters like the orcs and goblins were terrifying, given the style in which they were animated. By no means was this a children's movie. Bakshi never got to make part 2 of the story, which would have included the return of the king. He was told by the production company that they never planned to release the movie as the first installment. They believed that audiences would never pay to see an unfinished or half a film. Bakshi protested fiercely, but his vision of a complete story was disrupted. He firmly believed that true fans would have respected the original title and even anticipated the release of the finale. He went as far as suing Rankin Bass to prevent them from airing their Return of the King television sequel. The Return of the King, 1980. In 1980, Rankin Bass swooped in to create the final sequel of the Lord of the Rings franchise. There was tons of controversy surrounding this movie, as the majority believed that Bakshi was robbed of the opportunity to follow up his film with a sequel. The drama surrounding Rankin Bass versus Bakshi only got worse as the Tolkien estate decided to side with Bakshi at first, but ended up relinquishing the rights and allowing a special airing in Canada. This isn't very clear, since Christopher Tolkien didn't like the Bakshi film either. Rankin Bass's Return of the King was unique to say the least. The movie begins with Bilbo celebrating his 129th birthday. He noticed Frodo was missing a finger, and the minstrel of Gondor sang about this adventure. The beginning was loyal to the source material, with the ring starting out in the Bag End and Frodo embarking on his quest to destroy it in the fires where it was wrought. Frodo and Sam eventually reach the borders of the Shire, but Frodo is caught. While Frodo was imprisoned in Cirith Ungol, Samwise Gamgee took it upon himself to be the ring bearer. But soon enough, the weight of the ring began wearing down Sam. It was a burden too great to bear. The ring nearly seduced him into claiming it for his own benefit, but the compassion within him won over. Sam knew he had everything he needed in his life. He ran back to Cirith Ungol to rescue Frodo. The two escaped disguised as orcs. Meanwhile, at Minas Tirith, the capital of Gondor, Gandalf was steadily losing hope. They warily watched Mordor in the distance, awaiting the preparations for war to begin. Gandalf tried to spur Denethor II, the steward of Gondor, into action, but realized that man was quite crazy. The Gondorians wielded the red arrows, which they used to summon allies. By doing so, the riders of Rohan, led by King Theoden, rode swiftly towards Minas Tirith. Sam and Frodo barely reached Mount Doom when they were mistaken for orcs. The hobbits were taken back to the rotten pass of Cirith Ungol and were confronted by the Easterlings. A riot broke out between the two armies, and the hobbits narrowly escaped. Back at Mount Doom, they were met yet again with Gollum. In a last-ditch attempt, the creature of the caves tried to take the ring from Frodo, but they were so close to destroying it. Sam tackled Gollum while Frodo fled to the cracks of Doom. When Sam finds him, Frodo seems to be at war with himself. Had the ring finally won him over? Frodo claimed the ring was his precious. He slipped it on and made a run for it. Back at the Battle of Pelennor Fields, the gates of Minas Tirith were overrun overrun, but Rohan had decided to answer their plea for aid. King Theoden led a charge right into the overwhelming forces of Sauron, drumming up courage in them through his iconic speech. War inevitably came with tragedy as King Theoden was slain by the Witch King of Angmar. In this iteration of Return of the King, the Witch King sounded an awful lot like Skeletor. Theoden's niece, Éowyn, was disguised as a warrior. She avenged her uncle by banishing the Witch King to death just as Aragorn led the winning charge into victory. The remaining forces made haste to the Black Gate, where the giant mouth of Sauron taunted them, but Aragorn, son of Arathon, refused to back down. Meanwhile, Sam finally found Frodo and Gollum locked in a fierce tussle. Both were consumed by the same greed and lust for the ring that nearly drove them mad. But no one was crazier than Gollum, who bit off Frodo's finger with the ring on it. As he danced in joy, precariously close to the edge of a chasm, Gollum fell into the fire with his precious. But he died a happy creature, finally reunited with the One Ring after ages of being separated from it. Frodo and Sam were nearly killed by the collapse of Mount Doom, but were saved by the Eagles just in time. Their return marked Aragorn's coronation as the King of Gondor. The minstrel ended his ballad. Frodo accompanied Gandalf, Elrond, and Bilbo to the Undying Lands. He passed the Red Book of Westmarch, first begun by Bilbo, over to Sam, hoping that the Hobbit would fill it with peaceful stories from his life. The way Rankin Bass's Return of the King was received, it was seen more as a film made for children. This worked well for The Hobbit, which was really a children's book. However, the light-hearted animation and sing-song poems didn't really work for a darker, much more complex story like The Return of the King. But then again, we have Jackson's version if we wish to see seriousness. The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, 2024. This upcoming film will be an anime directed by Kenji Kamiyama. As the name suggests, the story would focus on Helm Hammerhand, the 9th king of Rohan. The movie was set to release following the 20th anniversary of the theatrical release of The Lord of the Rings. Sola Entertainment and Digital Arts animated the film mostly in 2D, with some 3D elements and rotoscoped horses. The story told in the movie is said to have taken place 250 years before the trilogy of the films, aka before the War of the Ring. It's also been suggested that Éowyn, voiced by Miranda Otto herself, is narrating this chronicle to her grandson, Barahir. The movie's plot is mainly from Appendix A, but focuses on Helm Hammerhead, who is voiced by Brian Cox. His daughter, Hera, was set to marry the Dunlending named Wolf. We will most probably see Hera discuss the story of the Shield Maidens in Rohan. Her husband, Wolf, is said to be the son of Freyka, a local lord of Rohan, who will be portrayed as a tragic but comic character. Hera's father, Helm, challenges Freyka to a fistfight, which results in the local lord's death. The king of Rohan realizes that the marriage being proposed is a political bargain and an attempted claim over the throne. Freyka's cunning son, Wolf, flees and rallies the rest of the Dunlendings to Isengard. Using his father's amassed wealth, Wolf and the Dunlendings launch an attack on Rohan. This turns out to be a full-blown battle as the Rohirrim fall outside Edoras. It's said that Wolf even orders the execution of Helm's first son, Haleth. Audiences can expect the War of Rohirrim to be a blood-soaked saga with an abundant share of gore. In the shock of his son's death, Helm retires to Hornburg for the winter. This was located near the mouth of Helm's Deep. All the while, his people are terrorized by orcs of the White Mountains. Helm's second son, Hama, is also killed during this time. This leads to the creation of the Deeping Wall, a 20-foot-tall wall of solid stone that we see surrounding Helm's Deep. This will be followed by Helm's recurring excursions to the Dunlending camps. Eventually, we'll get to see Helm gather his forces and drive back Dunlendings into lands next to Isengard. Amongst many other snippets, most of this information was revealed during the Annecy International Animation Film Festival in June 2023. The release of this film was further delayed due to the SAG-AFTRA strikes, but now it's finally set to release on December 13th, 2024. The fandom has high expectations for Warner Brothers' War of Rohirrim. Kenji Kamiyama is a well-known name in the world of anime, and fans only hope that Tolkien's stories are done justice in this movie. We'll just have to wait and watch. Marvelous verdict. Say what you will about these movies. They remain classics, so much so that Peter Jackson was inspired to recreate several moments from them. The works of Rankin Bass and Bakshi are simply incomparable. The Hobbit and Return of the King blend together seamlessly. They can be watched one after the other as a whole. Bakshi's Lord of the Rings is a whole story in itself. The creative liberties taken with its creation make it stand out from all other animated iterations. But that's where the beauty of Tolkien's literature lies. it gently encourages the unused corners of your imagination to get to work. We must remember that these movies were inspired directly by the books, so the 2D storytelling we see on screen is a result of their creators' imaginative mind's eye. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.